Just stop pulling me!
Hold still!
Ah!
Oh, God, my shoulder! Quit fighting!
Hi, Dad.
Hands! I'm hurt! Ah! Behind your back, now!
Jamal Washington had been a master electrician for 15 years, with a spotless record. Moussin and a reputation for responding quickly to emergency calls after storms like the one that had left half of downtown Fargo without power the previous night. He wore a bright blue uniform with the Apex Electric logo clearly visible on both his chest and back, and his company van, similarly marked, was parked directly below his ladder with hazard lights still flashing. The building's electrical panel had sustained damage during the powerful thunderstorm, and Thomas Mills, the building manager, had called Jamal specifically requesting his services due to his expertise with commercial systems and his availability to respond immediately to their emergency situation. "I don't care what you're doing. You need to come down right now or you're going to have a problem," Officer Brennan insisted, his tone growing more aggressive as he moved closer to the ladder. The officer made no attempt to look at the marked van or to acknowledge the uniform Jamal wore, instead focusing solely on the tools in his hands as if they were potential weapons rather than specialized equipment. Despite the clear evidence of Jamal's professional presence, including safety equipment, proper tools, and visible company identification, both officers maintained confrontational stances, with Officer Chen now placing her hand on the ladder as if preparing to shake it. "Officers, I understand you're responding to a call, but I'm just doing my job," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing danger of his situation. He carefully secured one live wire with an insulated cap before slowly reaching toward his back pocket with his free hand, saying, "I have my electrician's license and the work order right here in my pocket if you'll just give me a moment to finish making these connections safe." The morning sun glinted off his safety glasses as he tried to simultaneously manage the dangerous electrical work and respond to the unexpected police confrontation, a situation he'd experienced before, but never while 20 feet in the air with live voltage in his hands. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and be sure to like and subscribe so we can continue to cover more cases just like this. Officer Chen's reply cut through the air with an unmistakable threat. "Stop reaching! Keep your hands where we can see them!" She had drawn her taser now, pointing it upward at Jamal, who froze immediately, acutely aware of the deadly combination of electricity and his precarious position. The street remained relatively quiet that Monday morning in downtown Fargo, with few witnesses to the escalating situation, beyond a handful of pedestrians who had begun to slow their pace and watch the confrontation with concerned expressions. Jamal could feel sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to calculate his options. Finishing the safety connection would take just 30 seconds, but the officers below seemed unwilling to grant even that small window of time for him to prevent a potentially fatal electrical accident. "I'm just trying to make these wires safe before I come down," Jamal explained, speaking slowly and clearly while keeping his hands visible but still needing to complete the electrical connection. He could see Officer Brennan speaking into his radio, calling for backup despite there being no resistance or threat presented beyond Jamal's simple request for a moment to safely secure the dangerous wiring. The morning had started like any other emergency call. The building manager desperate for power restoration, Jamal arriving promptly with all his equipment and a straightforward repair job underway, until someone from a neighboring business had apparently seen a black man working on the electrical panel and immediately assumed criminal activity rather than legitimate work. "This is your final warning," Officer Brennan shouted, his voice echoing against the brick facade of the commercial building as he moved to the base of the ladder and placed his hand on the aluminum frame. Jamal felt a surge of real fear now, not just for his safety in coming down while the officers were clearly escalating the situation, but for the very real danger of unsecured electrical connections that could cause a fire or electrocute someone if left as they were. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was being threatened for doing exactly what he was supposed to do, ensuring electrical safety in a commercial building after storm damage. "Officer, please," Jamal said, his voice now betraying his growing anxiety as he tried one last time to reason with them. He carefully held up his company ID badge that hung around his neck, making sure to move slowly and keep his other hand in plain sight as he continued, My name is Jamal Washington. I'm a licensed master electrician with Apex Electric, and I'm here on an emergency call to restore power after last night's storm. The badge clearly displayed his photo, name, professional license number, and company logo, matching exactly the markings on both his uniform and the van below. All evidence that should have immediately diffused the situation in any reasonable scenario. Officer Chen seemed to hesitate momentarily, her eyes flicking toward the clearly marked vehicle, but Officer Brennan had already started climbing the first rungs of the ladder. "I'm coming up to get you if you don't come down right now," Brennan threatened, causing the ladder to shake slightly and creating a genuinely dangerous situation for Jamal, who was still holding tools and dealing with exposed electrical components. The situation had escalated from misunderstanding to genuine peril in less than 3 minutes, with neither officer taking the basic step of verifying Jamal's legitimate presence by speaking with building management or simply observing the obvious signs of his professional status. "Please stop. Shaking the ladder? I have live wires here," Jamal pleaded, now genuinely concerned for his physical safety, as the ladder wobbled beneath him. He made a split-second decision to quickly cap the final wire, knowing he couldn't leave it exposed without risking an electrical fire that could endanger everyone in the building. As his hands moved to complete this final safety measure, Officer Brennan's voice came thundering up from below. "He's not complying! Get down here now!" The next moments unfolded with terrifying speed as Officer Brennan grabbed Jamal's ankle and yanked downward, while Officer Chen maintained her taser aimed upward, creating a situation of maximum danger for the electrician. Jamal felt himself losing balance as his tool belt caught on a rung of the ladder, sending his specialized equipment clattering down to the concrete below, while he desperately tried to maintain his grip with one hand. "I'm coming down! Just stop pulling me!" he shouted, his professional composure finally breaking under the imminent threat of a 20-foot fall, while the officer continued to pull at his leg with increasing force. As Jamal attempted to climb down safely, Officer Brennan continued pulling on his leg with unnecessary force, causing Jamal's right shoulder to slam against the metal ladder as he lost his grip. Pain shot through his shoulder joint as he felt something tear inside, a white-hot flash of agony that made him cry out involuntarily as he barely managed to catch himself with his left arm, preventing a headfirst fall to the pavement below. Despite his injury and the clear danger of the situation, both officers continued shouting contradictory commands at him. "Hurry up! And don't make any sudden movements," creating an impossible scenario where compliance with one demand meant violating the other. The moment Jamal's feet touched the ground, Officer Brennan spun him around and forced him face first against the brick wall of the building, wrenching his injured arm behind his back, despite Jamal's cry of pain. "Stop resisting!" Brennan shouted, though Jamal was clearly not fighting back, only wincing in agony as the officer applied pressure to his freshly injured shoulder while applying handcuffs with unnecessary force. Officer Chen stood nearby, her taser still drawn but now pointed at the ground, her expression showing the first hints of uncertainty as she finally took a moment to look at the clearly marked Apex Electric van, the scattered professional tools on the ground, and Jamal's uniform, all evidence that contradicted the breaking-in scenario they had rushed to address. "My shoulder's injured. You pulled me off the ladder," Jamal said through gritted teeth, the pain intensifying as the tight metal cuffs dug into his wrists. Officer Brennan ignored his statement about the injury, instead beginning to recite Miranda rights while marching the handcuffed electrician toward the police vehicle parked haphazardly at the curb. The growing crowd of onlookers had begun to film with their phones, several voices calling out that Jamal was clearly an electrician and questioning why the police were arresting someone who was obviously working. "What's going on here?" came a new voice from the building entrance, where Thomas Mills, the building manager, had emerged after hearing the commotion outside. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he saw Jamal, the electrician he had specifically called for emergency repairs, being led away in handcuffs while clearly in pain. "Officers, there's some mistake. That's Jamal Washington, the electrician I hired to fix our power after the storm," Thomas explained, rushing forward with a clipboard that held the work order he had signed just 40 minutes earlier. Officer Chen turned toward the building manager while her partner continued moving Jamal toward the police vehicle, responding with immediate suspicion rather than relief at this clarifying information. "Sir, stay back. We're responding to a report of someone tampering with the electrical system," she stated firmly, positioning herself between Thomas and Officer Brennan as if the building manager himself might pose some kind of threat. The absurdity of the situation was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone except the officers. They were arresting the very person who had been officially hired to repair the electrical system, based solely on a report from someone who had apparently seen a black man working and immediately assumed criminal activity. "I'm the building manager, and I specifically called Apex Electric for emergency repair service this morning," Thomas insisted, holding up the clipboard with the work order clearly visible. His frustration was evident as he continued more forcefully. "That man you're arresting is a licensed master electrician who's been working on our building for years. You've made a serious mistake here." The crowd of bystanders had grown to about a dozen people now, many with phones recording the incident, their murmurs of disapproval growing louder as they witnessed the officers' refusal to acknowledge the obvious error in their assessment of the situation. Officer Brennan had reached the police vehicle and was now attempting to place Jamal in the back seat, seemingly determined to complete the arrest despite the building manager's clear explanation. "We'll sort this out at the station," Brennan stated dismissively, his tone suggesting he was unwilling to consider the possibility of a mistake despite the mounting evidence. Jamal winced as the movement sent another surge of pain through his injured shoulder. His face contorted in a grimace as he tried to comply with the officer's directions while minimizing further damage to what he suspected might be a torn rotator cuff. "Officer, please look at my ID and the work order. They're in my right pocket," Jamal said, his voice strained but still remarkably composed given the circumstances. He made no attempt to resist physically, understanding all too well as a black man in America that any perceived non-compliance could escalate the situation to potentially deadly force. The morning sun now illuminated the scene fully, highlighting the stark contrast between Jamal's professional attire and equipment and the officer's aggressive response, while also shining on the growing number of cell phones recording every moment of the unfolding injustice. "I'm calling your supervisor right now," Thomas declared, pulling out his phone and stepping away from Officer Chen, who seemed increasingly uncertain about how to proceed, as the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. The building manager's voice carried clearly in the morning air as he began explaining the situation to someone at the police department, emphasizing that officers were currently arresting the licensed professional he had hired for emergency repairs. Officer Chen glanced at her partner, who was still proceeding with processing Jamal, despite the growing evidence of a mistake, and finally approached the police vehicle with a concerned expression. "Jake, maybe we should verify his ID first," Officer Chen suggested quietly to her partner, who responded with a dismissive headshake as he finished securing Jamal in the back seat of the patrol car. Officer Brennan's refusal to even check Jamal's identification or the work order demonstrated a disturbing commitment to the initial assumption of criminality, despite all evidence to the contrary. The crowd's disapproval had transformed into active calls for the officers to release Jamal, with several people shouting that they had video of the entire incident and would be sending it to news stations and posting it online. 3 hours later, Jamal sat in an emergency room cubicle at Sanford Medical Center in downtown Fargo, his shoulder now properly examined and immobilized in a sling as he waited for the doctor to return with results from his MRI. The pain medication had taken the edge off the worst of the physical agony, but the emotional and psychological wounds remained raw and throbbing as he replayed the morning's events in his mind for the 100th time. He had finally been released from police custody after Thomas Mills had not only shown officers the work order, but had also called the owner of Apex Electric, who had arrived at the station demanding Jamal's immediate release and threatening legal action for the unnecessary detention and injury of his most experienced electrician. "Mr. Washington," Dr. Patel said as she pulled back the privacy curtain, tablet in hand displaying Jamal's scan results. Her expression was professionally composed but sympathetic as she explained. "You have a grade 2 tear of your rotator cuff and significant soft tissue damage to the shoulder joint. This is going to require at minimum 6 to 8 weeks of recovery time before you can return to your normal work duties." The News hit Jamal like another physical blow, the implications immediately clear. 2 months without being able to climb ladders or perform the physical aspects of his job meant not only pain and recovery, but significant financial strain for his family and potential loss of clients for his employer. As Jamal processed this information, his phone buzzed with yet another message, this one from Marcus Johnson, an attorney with the North Dakota Civil Rights Coalition, who had already heard about the incident from one of the bystander videos that had begun circulating on social media. "I'd like to represent you in this matter at no cost," the message read, followed by, "What happened to you today is textbook racial profiling and excessive force, and we need to hold these officers accountable." Jamal stared at the message for a long moment, conflicting emotions washing over him. He had never wanted to be in this position, never sought to be a case or an incident, but the throbbing in his shoulder and the memory of being treated like a criminal while simply doing his job hardened his resolve to ensure there were consequences for what had happened to him. Later that evening, seated at his kitchen table with his wife Melissa beside him, Jamal watched the local news coverage of his incident, which had already become the lead story across Fargo-Moorhead media outlets. Witnesses say the electrician repeatedly identified himself and asked for time to safely secure electrical connections before being forcibly removed from his ladder by officers, the reporter stated over footage clearly captured by a bystander, showing the moment Officer Brennan had pulled on Jamal's leg, causing him to slam against the ladder. The news anchor continued with a statement from the Fargo Police Department that was notably non-committal. "We are reviewing the incident and gathering all relevant information before making any further statements on the matter." The following morning, still struggling with pain despite medication, Jamal met with Attorney Johnson at the Coalition's office in downtown Fargo, where they reviewed not just the bystander videos, but also, crucially, the body camera footage that had been secured through an emergency records request. "This is even worse than I expected," Johnson said grimly as they watched the unedited footage, which clearly showed Jamal's repeated attempts to identify himself and explain his work, the officer's refusal to verify his statements, and most damning of all, a brief exchange between Officers Brennan and Chen before approaching Jamal. "Another one trying to case the building," Brennan could be heard saying as they exited their vehicle, revealing a prejudgment of the situation before they had even spoken to Jamal. By the end of the week, Jamal's story had spread beyond Fargo to national news outlets, with headlines highlighting yet another incident of a black professional being criminalized while performing their job. He sat in his living room, arm still in a sling and unable to work, watching as commentators debated his experience. Some defending the officers by emphasizing their duty to respond to calls, others pointing out the obvious racial dynamics at play when a black electrician in full uniform with a marked company vehicle was automatically assumed to be engaged in criminal activity. The viral spread of the videos had prompted the Fargo Police Department to place both officers on administrative leave pending a formal investigation, a development that brought Jamal no satisfaction as he faced mounting medical bills and the challenge of supporting his family while unable to perform his physically demanding job. "The caller who reported you has been identified," Attorney Johnson informed Jamal during their third meeting, sliding a document across the table that contained the transcript of the 911 call. Jamal read it silently, his expression hardening as he absorbed the caller's words. "There's a black guy messing with the electrical box at the building across the street, and I'm pretty sure he's trying to break in or something. He's got tools and everything." The caller, identified as Richard Harris, owner of a neighboring business, had made no mention of Jamal's uniform, the clearly marked company van, or any attempt to verify whether the black guy might actually be a professional electrician responding to an emergency call after a major storm had knocked out power to multiple buildings in the area. As June turned to July, Jamal's physical therapy sessions became a regular part of his routine, each painful exercise a reminder of how a normal workday had turned into a life-altering event through no fault of his own. During one particularly difficult session, as the physical therapist worked to restore mobility to his damaged shoulder, Jamal received a call from Thomas Mills, the building manager who had witnessed part of his wrongful detention. "Jamal, I just finished giving my formal statement to Internal Affairs, and I want you to know I told them everything. How they ignored me when I tried to explain you were hired to be there, how they refused to even look at the work order, all of it," Thomas said, his voice conveying both support and lingering outrage at how the situation had been handled. On a sweltering July afternoon, Jamal Washington sat in the front row of the Fargo City Commission chambers, his shoulders still in a therapeutic brace as he prepared to address the commission regarding his experience. The room had filled to capacity, with community members, media representatives, and even fellow electricians from across North Dakota gathering to witness what had become a focal point for discussions about racial profiling and police procedures in the city. Beside him sat Attorney Johnson, who had compiled a comprehensive presentation that included not only the now infamous videos of Jamal's detention, but also statistics on disproportionate police stops and interventions involving people of color in professional settings across the region. "Mr. Washington, you have the floor," announced Commissioner Elizabeth Patterson, her tone formal but her expression betraying concern as Jamal made his way to the podium, the physical limitations from his injury evident in his careful movements. Standing before the microphone, Jamal spoke not with rage, but with a measured dignity that commanded the room's attention. "I come before you today, not just as someone who was wrongfully detained and injured while doing my job, but as a father, a veteran who served this country, and a professional with 15 years of experience who was treated like a criminal simply because of how I look." His words hung in the air as he described in methodical detail the events of June 3rd, from receiving the emergency call to the moment he felt his shoulder tear as Officer Brennan pulled him from the ladder. The most powerful moment came when Attorney Johnson played the synchronized footage, body camera video alongside bystander recordings, showing the stark reality of what had transpired that morning in downtown Fargo. The audience watched in stunned silence as the evidence clearly showed Jamal's repeated attempts to identify himself, the visible company logo on his uniform and van, and most disturbingly, the officer's refusal to allow him the 30 seconds needed to safely secure the electrical connections before descending from the ladder. When the video showed Officer Brennan grabbing Jamal's ankle and the subsequent impact against the ladder that caused his injury, audible gasps filled the chamber, followed by murmurs of outrage that the commissioner had to quiet with her gavel. "What you've just witnessed represents a fundamental failure to protect and serve all citizens equally," Attorney Johnson stated, directing the commission's attention to a slide showing Officer Brennan's previous complaints for excessive force, both involving men of color. The attorney continued with devastating precision. Officer Brennan approached this situation with a presumption of criminality that overrode all visible evidence to the contrary, and Officer Chen failed in her duty to de-escalate or verify basic facts before participating in actions that caused significant physical harm to a citizen who was performing essential services for our community after a natural disaster. The commission members' expressions ranged from discomfort to outright dismay as the presentation continued, now highlighting the 911 caller's assumption that a black man working with tools must be breaking in rather than performing legitimate work. Police Chief Michael Anderson, who had remained stone-faced throughout most of the presentation, finally approached the podium when given his opportunity to respond. "While I cannot comment on ongoing internal investigations or potential disciplinary actions," he began cautiously, "I want to acknowledge that what happened to Mr. Washington represents a failure in our procedures for verifying information at the scene before taking action." His carefully worded statement, clearly crafted to minimize legal liability, prompted shouted questions from community members in attendance. Would this have happened to a white electrician? And when will Officers Brennan and Chen be held accountable? The chief's discomfort was visible as he attempted to maintain official neutrality while facing a room full of citizens demanding specific answers and concrete actions. As the meeting extended well beyond its scheduled time, Jennifer Warren, the supervising lieutenant for both officers involved in Jamal's case, requested to address the commission and audience. "As the direct supervisor for these officers, I need to acknowledge that there were multiple opportunities to verify Mr. Washington's identity and purpose that were ignored," she stated with unexpected frankness that caused a stir in the room. Lieutenant Warren continued with what appeared to be genuine remorse. Our department has policies requiring officers to gather all relevant information before escalating to physical intervention, especially in nonviolent situations, and those policies were clearly not followed in this case. Her candid assessment, which stopped short of directly criticizing the officers but clearly acknowledged procedural failures, marked the first official admission of wrongdoing from within the police department itself. The meeting reached its emotional peak when Thomas Mills, the building manager who had hired Jamal, took the podium to describe his own experience that morning. "I came outside to find the electrician I had hired, a professional I've worked with for years, being handcuffed despite my attempts to explain the situation," Mills recounted, his frustration still evident weeks after the incident. His testimony was particularly damning as he described how Officer Chen had physically blocked him from approaching Officer Brennan to provide the work order documentation, saying, "It was as if they were determined to complete the arrest regardless of the facts, and that determination nearly cost a good man his career and could have resulted in much worse injuries had he actually fallen from that ladder." As the City Commission meeting finally concluded with promises of a comprehensive review and policy recommendations to be delivered within 30 days, Jamal stood surrounded by supporters in the hallway outside the chambers. Local news cameras captured his composed but powerful statement. "What happened to me happens to black professionals across America every day. We are presumed dangerous until proven otherwise, even when we're clearly just doing our jobs." The juxtaposition of Jamal in his arm brace, still unable to return to work, against the backdrop of city officials now scrambling to address the incident, created a powerful image that would lead newscasts across the region that evening and continue to fuel the growing demand for concrete changes in police training and procedures. 2 days after the commission meeting, the Fargo Police Department released a statement announcing that Officer Brennan had been suspended without pay, pending completion of the internal affairs investigation, while Officer Chen had been reassigned to administrative duties. The statement included an unprecedented paragraph acknowledging that preliminary findings indicate racial bias may have influenced the assessment of the situation and subsequent actions taken by responding officers. This admission, clearly reluctant but necessary given the overwhelming evidence and public pressure, marked a significant turning point in how the department was addressing the incident, moving from generic procedural language to a specific acknowledgement of potential racial bias in policing. As July turned to August, Jamal's attorney filed a formal civil rights lawsuit against the Fargo Police Department, Officers Brennan and Chen individually, and Richard Harris, the business owner who had made the biased 911 call without any attempt to verify whether the black man he was reporting might be a legitimate professional. The lawsuit detailed not only the physical injuries Jamal had sustained, but also the lost wages, emotional distress, and damage to professional reputation resulting from the incident. The filing of the lawsuit, covered extensively by local and national media, ensured that Jamal's experience would not be quietly forgotten or administratively buried, but would instead become a legal case that would require formal response and resolution from all parties involved in the unjustified targeting of a black professional simply doing his job. By late September, as the leaves in Fargo began their annual transformation to brilliant autumn hues, the Fargo City Commission unanimously approved a comprehensive settlement agreement with Jamal Washington. The financial component, $850,000 for medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and punitive damages, made headlines, but Jamal found greater satisfaction in the policy changes that accompanied the settlement. "The money helps my family recover from the financial impact of my injury," Jamal told reporters outside City Hall, "but the real victory is in the mandatory changes to police training and procedures that will hopefully prevent other professionals from experiencing what I went through." The settlement included a requirement that the Fargo Police Department implement new training specifically addressing bias in perception of professionals of color, with a focus on verification procedures before escalating any nonviolent situation. Officer Brennan, whose internal affairs investigation had revealed a pattern of disproportionate force against minorities, was terminated from the force and had his law enforcement certification placed under review by the state board. Officer Chen received a 30-day suspension without pay and was required to complete extensive additional training on bias recognition and de-escalation techniques before being permitted to return to patrol duties. a consequence that acknowledged her failure to intervene or properly assess the situation, while also recognizing her junior status and the influence of her more experienced partner. Perhaps most satisfying to Jamal was the outcome of the separate civil case against Richard Harris, the business owner who had made the biased 911 call. The court ruled that Harris had demonstrated negligent racial bias in reporting a clearly uniformed professional with a marked company vehicle as a suspected criminal without any attempt to verify the situation. The judgment required Harris to pay damages and to display a prominent sign in his business. Acknowledging that professionals of all races regularly perform legitimate work in this area and providing contact information for building management for anyone with actual concerns about unauthorized activity. A public reminder of the real-world consequences of acting on racial bias. By October, Jamal had progressed significantly in his physical therapy, regaining approximately 80% of his shoulder function and beginning limited return-to-work duties that didn't involve ladder climbing or heavy lifting. During this time, he accepted an invitation from the North Dakota Electrical Contractors Association to speak at their annual safety conference about his experience. Safety isn't just about proper wiring and fall protection, Jamal told the gathered electricians and contractors, many of whom had been following his case closely. It's also about creating an environment where professionals of all races can do their essential work without fear of being criminalized or physically endangered by those who are supposed to protect public safety. The broader impact of Jamal's case became apparent when the International Association of Chiefs of Police featured it as a case study in their quarterly publication, using it to illustrate the dangers of allowing bias to override professional judgment and procedural safeguards. The article, co-authored by a police training specialist and a civil rights attorney, highlighted how the responding officers had bypassed multiple opportunities to verify Jamal's legitimate presence before escalating to physical intervention, and how this failure had not only injured an innocent citizen, but had also damaged public trust in law enforcement and resulted in significant financial liability for the department and city. The association recommended specific protocols for responding to calls involving suspicious persons engaged in what might be legitimate professional activities, with emphasis on verification before intervention. Jamal's experience also catalyzed a community initiative in Fargo called Respect All Professionals, which brought together tradespeople, delivery drivers, home health workers, and others who frequently work in public or at various locations and might be vulnerable to similar bias-based reporting or police responses. The initiative created informational resources for both community members and law enforcement, highlighting how bias often leads people to question the legitimacy of professionals of color while automatically assuming white workers in the same roles are supposed to be there. Local businesses began displaying Respect All Professionals stickers in their windows, indicating their commitment to verifying concerns before calling authorities about workers in their vicinity. By November, 6 months after the incident that had changed his life, Jamal Washington stood before a group of police cadets at the North Dakota Law Enforcement Training Academy, sharing his experience as part of a new required module on community relations and bias recognition. "I never wanted to be standing here," he told the attentive group of future officers, his shoulder now mostly healed, but the psychological impact still evident in his careful choice of words. "I was just an electrician responding to an emergency call after a storm knocked out power to essential businesses in downtown Fargo. Nothing more, nothing less." The cadets watched with solemn expressions as body camera footage from the incident played on the screen behind him, providing a powerful real-world example of how quickly bias can escalate a routine situation into a dangerous confrontation with lasting consequences. As the one-year anniversary of the incident approached, Jamal had not only returned to full duty as a master electrician, but had also become a respected voice in the ongoing national conversation about racial profiling and its real-world impacts on professionals of color. When interviewed for a national news segment about his case and its aftermath, Jamal reflected, "What happened to me that morning wasn't unique or unusual. It happens to black professionals every day across this country." He continued with the measured wisdom that had become his trademark throughout the ordeal. "The difference in my case was that multiple videos captured the incident. The evidence was undeniable, and enough people in positions of power were willing to acknowledge the reality of what those videos showed. a black man being criminalized and physically endangered simply for doing his job while black. The final chapter in Jamal's journey toward justice came when Governor Sarah Peterson signed the Professional Safety and Verification Act, legislation directly inspired by his case, that established new statewide standards for police response to calls involving potentially legitimate professional activities. The law, supported by a bipartisan coalition of legislators, required dispatchers to gather specific information about why a caller believes professional activity might be suspicious, mandated that responding officers make reasonable attempts to verify a worker's legitimacy before intervention, and established civil penalties for knowingly false or bias-motivated reports about professionals engaged in legitimate work. At the signing ceremony, Jamal stood alongside legislators, police representatives, and trade union leaders, a living embodiment of how one person's ordeal could lead to systemic changes that protected others from similar experiences. "My story isn't over," Jamal told the assembled crowd at the bill signing, his voice steady and resolute as he looked toward the future. No single law or policy change can eliminate bias or guarantee justice, but each step forward matters. Each improvement in how we treat one another as professionals and as human beings makes a difference. As he concluded his remarks, Jamal gestured to his teenage sons seated in the audience, saying, "I want my boys to live in a world where they can pursue any profession they choose and be seen first as the skilled professionals they are, not as threats to be contained or criminals to be subdued." The sustained applause that followed his words reflected not just appreciation for his advocacy, but acknowledgement of the universal hope embedded in his message, that one day all professionals would be judged by the quality of their work rather than the color of their skin.